Hello everyone, in today's video we are going to discuss 4 critical chess endgames that every player must know. So definitely endgames are the most critical part in the game of chess. Even if you want to defend a losing position or if you want to convert a winning position into a win. So definitely you must know how to play the endgames. So yeah, I have bring you 4 critical endgames from the games of top players. So I don't want to waste any further time because these 4 endgames are definitely going to help you to improve your game. So let's start. So we have the position number 1. It's white to play. You can try to pause the video and try to think how are you going to continue the position if you are playing with the white pieces. Okay, so what's happening? So white is having the open c file for the rook. The pieces are nicely developed. White is having more space in the center, whereas black pieces are not yet developed. Pretty congested, so definitely white is having the advantage, but the question is how to continue. So you will realize that the king is kind of out of the game. So like I want to play the move e5, but here we have bishop b4 check and eventually the pawn is hanging. So I can't really play e5. So first, if you found the move king f2, kudos to you. The idea is quite stable. First of all, now your threat is to definitely play e5, and you can even play king f3 trying to advance the king, because in the end game you must activate each and every piece of yours. So after king to f2, we have e5. In order to stop white c5, black plays e5, and now white is again having a very strong move. You can pause the video. Okay, so you can play the move bishop to c5, because I want to penetrate with my rook to the 7th rank, but I can't do so because the bishop is covering it. So the best way is to play bishop c5. If I try to capture the pawn, bishop takes and the position looks fine for black. So bishop c5, and this is good for white. Now we have, like, black is having a couple of options. Bishop into c5, maybe bishop b8, or even to capture the f4 pawn. If black captures the f4 pawn, we can capture the bishop and play the move king to f3. And after g5, trying to defend the pawn, h4, h6, takes, and already rook h5, penetrating with the rook, attacking the g5 pawn, f6, and now we have bishop to c4, simply getting the last piece into the game. And the idea could be to play even rook h1, bishop d7, rook h1, rook f8, rook h6, with the idea of e5. So b5, just e5, and it's crushing position. Like, you can't take, a rook is hanging, so the position is completely winning for white. So this is how you play the endgame. If your opponent plays bishop b8, not trading off the bishops, I can play bishop e7, rook moves. You can't play rook d7 because the bishop is hanging. So rook e8, and now we have d6. And after g6, the position is already crushing. The bishop can't move. The bishop is well protected. I can capture the pawn. Maybe push is coming. Maybe bishop c4. The position is already lost for black. So this is how you can play if your opponent plays bishop b8. And finally, if your opponent tries to capture the bishop, I can simply capture it back. And now we have e into f4. After e into f4, simply king f3, advancing the king, and also at the same time prior to capturing the f4 pawn. Now here black is having two options, either to protect the pawn or either to simply focus on the developing of his pieces. So if black tries to defend the pawn, again we have h4, h6, takes, and now we have rook to h5. Again advancing the rook, attacking the g5 pawn. You have to play f6 and now e5, again a very strong move. What's the idea? I want to make black lose the control of the g5 square. So after something like bishop f5, if you try to capture, I can capture with a check, capture this pawn, capture the f4 pawn, and eventually convert this pawn into a win. So you can't really take. So we have bishop f5, but now I will capture on f6, king f7, takes, king f6, king f4, and the position is already winning for white because the king is very well advanced. We are having a strong pawn on d5. The bishop is ready to develop, and the position is already better for white. So that's exactly what happens if your opponent plays g5. So if your opponent plays bishop to d7, now white can simply play bishop to d3. Because I can definitely go for capturing the pawn, which is also a fine way. But I think you must try to focus of your development of the pieces in the end game, because activity is the main thing compared to the, like, it doesn't matter if your opponent is 1 or even 2 pawns up, but if you're having the advantage of like activated pieces, you're definitely going to have something in the position. So after bishop d3, if rook a to c8, we can play rook h to c1. And here again, black is having two options, either to trade off the rooks or to play g5. If your opponent plays rook into c5, we have rook c5, rook c8. We can already trade off the rooks and king f4 because our king is much more advanced compared to the black king. So this is already winning for white. For example, if maybe f6 trying to block the king, we can simply play h4, h6, e5, check, takes, king e4. And it doesn't really matter because our position is already pretty rich. Our pieces are well activated compared to the black pieces. a3, stopping any advanced pushes. And after bishop b7, it's kind of a zugzwang. I can push the pawn, sacrifice the pawn, take the pawn, and protect this pawn, capture the pawn, and basically advance this pawn to a queen and eventually win the game. So this is exactly what happens if f6. If king f8, we have king e5, advancing the king. Not pushing at the pawns, but first advancing the king. King e7, check, king f6, a4 because the pawn was hanging, bishop b3. It doesn't really matter, we can play e5. Our opponent can't really capture the pawn because we can capture this pawn and can eventually push this pawn to a queen. So we have h5 maybe, king g7, bishop e6, king to f8, basically advancing the king to the very end, and after a6, simply a5, locking this position, and after bishop to d5, just bishop e2, and having this nice idea of bishop e2, bishop f3, and this is winning now. If you trade off the bishop, you lose this pawn, and if you move the bishop, you lose this pawn, and eventually lose the game. So this is how you can play this endgame, a very typical way to play. Basically, the focus was to develop all your pieces, activate all your pieces. So yeah, if your opponent plays g5 in this position, we can already play rook c7, a very strong move. Rook takes, and yeah, if bishop c8, like we can play e5. Yeah, the point is here is you can't really capture the pawn because the bishop is hanging, so maybe a6. And now just king e4, just activating your pieces. b5, bishop e2, bishop h5, because white realized the f7 is weak, and now this position is losing for black. After bishop h5, I can like just get the king and it's winning. So yeah, bishop c8 not working, so if bishop a4, I can play king g4. Definitely there was a choice, I can even go for capturing the pawn on b7, but as I said, the pawn is going nowhere. First focus on developing your pieces, activating your pieces. h6, rook takes now, rook d7, rook to b4, check, king f4, king f5, h4, takes, and if you capture with the f pawn, I can play e5, and it's a check, king f6, bishop bishop c4, and you can already realize the position is lost for black. So if black captures with the h pawn, we still have e5, and if for example rook takes, we have a check. Now bishop b1, a very strong move because the bishop was hanging. Rook d8 and just simply e6 takes, and the position is lost. Like there is nothing left. The bishop is covering the square. We are going to make the queen. And okay, a very nice way. Rook b2, but it's basically now putting the rook over here, and the position is lost. Like I'm having this bishop over here, so it's completely lost. So yeah, a very good way. If you try to capture the e5 pawn, I can capture with the king. Pawn push, takes, e, and now d6. Rook over here, bishop c4, bishop f5, just push. And if you try to capture, this is lost. This is not lost because black would be having a check. So first rook over here. Now just capturing the bishop and it's lost position. So if rook f8, just rook d5, just rook d4, making a queen. And if you try to defend it, just king d6, king to c7, and the position is lost. So this is how you play this instructive, I would say minor pieces rook endgame. like a very good way to basically activate all your pieces, activate even your king. Okay, so we have the second position on our board. Again, this time we are again playing with the white pieces. And yeah, it's a very interesting diagram. So try to pause the video and have a think and try to think how are you going to continue the position. Okay, so I hope that you guys must have had a nice deep thought. And you must have realized that definitely the rook is pretty active. The knight rook are kind of defending. Our c4 pawn is hanging. So what to do? I can't really protect this pawn. Like my king is not really activated. So can I activate somehow? I wanna get this king over somehow to the queen side. And if you found the move e5, kudos to you, sacrificing a pawn. Like you can already realize that in the end game, you can even sacrifice material in order to get the activity. So after e5, we have like there are a couple of ways for black to play: d into e5, knight into c4, even rook e8. So if black tries to capture the c4 pawn, we can play e into d6, knight check, king f3. If black captures the pawn, it doesn't really matter because now we have d7, and now black has to play rook d8, or else we are having rook d6 followed by d8 making queen. So rook d8. If knight b6, now we can simply take on a7 because black can't really capture because we can make the queen. So rook d8, and now we have rook a7 still. And this position is lost because the king has already been activated. I can simply again activate the king further, push this pawn, and eventually win the game. So a very nice way to play the endgame. If black plays rook e8, we can push the pawn, not to capture the pawn because the knight is hanging. So push the pawn, rook e7 in order to protect the a7 pawn, and now just simply capture the knight. Takes, and now simply knight c3 with the idea of knight e4 capturing this pawn, which can't really be protected, followed by knight f5, and the position is completely winning for white. So coming to the main move, what happens if d into e5? We can play king f3. That's the main reason of sacrificing the pawn. And now, like, black is again having two options to either capture the pawn or to play rook f8 check. If rook f8 check, simply king to e4, rook f2, knight to c3, rook to c2, just king d3, and the position is lost. a7 is falling, and eventually I can capture this pawn. So basically, the position is eventually lost. You can't really do anything. So if knight into c4, I can simply advance my king, rook d8, knight c3, rook d7 in order to protect the pawn, but it doesn't really matter now, as rook c6, a very strong move, capturing the pawn, hitting the knight, capturing this pawn, and eventually win the game. Yeah, that's it. King f7, knight e4, takes, check, king f5, and I think it's now just a formality to play, because everything is collapsing. If black tries to push the pawn further, we can even push this pawn, like the rook defends it. We can play king here, rook f7, rook to c7, and the game is over. So this was the second diagram. Once again, a very instructive one. We learned that we can even sacrifice material in order to gain the activity of our king or the other pieces. So this was the second diagram. So now let's move on to the third diagram. Okay, so we have the third diagram on our board. This time we are going to play with the black pieces, and it's black to play. Just allow me to flip off the board. It's black to play. Try to pause the video and try to think, how are you going to continue the position if you are playing with the black pieces? Okay, so let's try to understand what's happening. So black is having a very strong pawn on e3, which can't really be attacked because every square is particularly speaking covered up, and every particular piece is doing the best job. So like the only piece that is left in the game, that is the king. So somehow if I be able to activate the king layer, like just put the king on f3, the position is already winning for black. The question is how to do so. So if you found the move king g7, that's the best move, congratulations. a4, king f6, a5. If white tries to play g4, trying to take away the squares from the king, now we can just make the path open by playing the move g5, which is a very strong move. The idea is pretty concrete. We want to simply take the f pawn, and then we would be winning. And if White tries to give us a check. If white tries to capture the pawn, we can capture the pawn back and get in. If white tries to push the pawn, we can even get in with something like king over here and get in. So that's why rook check, the king goes back, and you have to take, or else I can simply take the pawn. But the moment you take, now I'm having the push, e2 check, king move, and now we have simply rook to c2. And after rook c2, knight f3 is coming up and the game is over. So that's why e4, e5 the best move, king f5, and now we have e6. If white tries to play h3, covering the g4 square, we have e2 check, a very strong move, king to e1, and now we have e3. We are now making the square for the king via like this. So now it's winning e6, king to e4, e7, king to f3, and this is completely winning position because like this check is coming up. For example, if you play rook b8, knight c2 is a mate, and you can't do anything, it's completely losing. So yeah, a6, king g4, and now white's having many variations to play. King g2 is a move, a7 is a move, or even king e1. So if king e1 is played, we can simply get in with the king. a7 is simply met with rook a8. Remember, knight c2 is not working because after takes, queen takes. It looks like it's a mate on h1, but here white is having queen s6, covering the f1 square, and it's not a mate and it's a drawish position. So that's why we have rook a8, and after rook a8, now it's completely winning. We can capture the pawn and eventually win the game. So yeah, so we have the move king g2 covering the f3 square, and now we have the move e2, pushing the pawn, threatening to make the queen. So now like if king f2, we can give a check, king goes back, king over here, and it's still the same, it's completely winning. The king has been cornered. So if h3 check, king f5, king f2, now again we have e3 check. You can't capture the pawn because I can make the queen. So king goes back, king e4, rook over here, but king comes in, takes checks. That's the only way, or else knight c2 or king knight f3 is simply crushing. So takes checks, and now it's all formality. You can attack the knight, you can capture the knight, and eventually like the game was simply won. So yeah, this was the third diagram, a very interesting one. Like getting the idea to know that you should get all your pieces into the game via king g7, king f6, king f5, king g4, king f3. Like many players would like to maybe capture the pawn, go for this direct pawn, trying to capture this pawn directly. Guys, but that's not the best way to do so. You are wasting the time. The time is very precious, especially in the end game. So first try to get all your pieces at the best active square possible. So this was the third diagram, so now let's move on to the final diagram of the day. Okay, so we have the final and the fourth diagram of the day. We are playing with the white pieces and we have a position. So try to pause the video and try to think, how are you going to continue the position? Okay, so if I try to count the material, black is having 5 pawns, white is having 5 pawns. The position looks equal, at least from the material-wise point of view. But here, an interesting move here is to play bishop into f5, capturing the knight, takes, and getting the idea to know that this position, this rook endgame is winning for white. Yeah, basically assessing the position is very important. Because after gf5, it looks like white is losing the pawn, so how is it like good for white? Like if you try to play rook d7, it's not really working. Because after takes, king e2, c6, takes, rook here, takes, and now c5, and you will get to know the idea that now the position is getting in the favor of black, which we definitely don't want. But the idea is to play king to g3. We are going to use the combination of this pawn, rook, and king to checkmate this black king, or to maybe promote this queen into the queen. Now our idea of king g3 is to sacrifice the pawn, but get our king to the most active square, which is the g6 square, or even f6. So we have takes, king h4, and now like if black plays c5, we can push the pawn, takes, king g5. You get the idea. Like I can also go like this, but it's not working, and it's also slow. It takes 3 move to get the king to f6, but after g6, it only takes 2 move for the king. And at the same time, the pawn has already been advanced. So after takes, push here, like the pawn has been stopped, and now king h6, push, check, and make the queen, the game is over. So yeah, this is how you play if your opponent plays c5. If rook f3, that looks the most principled move to capture the pawn, which can't really be defended. But as I said, we don't really want to protect the pawn or anything. We want to simply push the pawn. So white has already sacrificed 2 of his pawns, but got a very strong pawn on the g6. And got his active king into the game. So now we have rook e4. If rook g4 check, now simply king f6 is simply a class move. Now no more checks available, rook coming in, the game is over. So rook e4, king to f6, rook king over here, because it was mate in 1. So king to g8, rook check, king goes into the corner, and now capturing the pawn. Rook goes back, or it's going to be one move mate. So now again simply capturing the f5 pawn. Like getting to know the idea how to continue the position is an art. Like we have rook e4, again rook king to f6, again threatening mate in 1. Like black can give a check, but king over here. If black goes simply back, we can even capture the third pawn, and it's completely winning now. So that's why I check, but over here, check, and simply capturing the pawn. Like already getting the idea that even if black captures the pawn, we can go into the endgame and it's completely winning for us. So we have rook g1, takes rook over here, trying to cut off the white's king, but it's not working. King d6, push the pawn, get the try to trade off the rooks. King over here, push the pawn, and after d6, black resigned the game. A very strong game played by white. White can just keep on pushing the pawn, like for example, rook over here, just rook e7, and now just push off the pawn, and the game is over. So yeah, this was the 4th diagram, a very interesting one. Like we got to know the idea that we can even sacrifice material in order to gain the activity of the pieces, especially king, because king are the most powerful piece when it comes to the end game. So yeah, this was the 4th diagram, and I'm pretty sure that these 4 diagrams must have helped you to improve your game, like improve your end game skills. If it did, then make sure to like the video, share this video with everyone, and make sure to subscribe to our channel if you are new to our channel. I'm going to come up with these more interesting videos like this. So till then, stay tuned and keep watching One Shot Chess.